You're listening to LeaderCast, episode 193. Welcome to LeaderCast, Transforming Missions podcast with Tim Bias and Sarah Thomas, providing you with insights and resources you need to lead a movement of Jesus followers.
Those of you who've been listening to us this month, we started the month talking about a growth mindset, and we want to end the month the same way. Today, we have 5 ways a growth mindset can help leaders navigate the challenges that continue to emerge all around us. So, as a reminder, in a growth mindset, people understand that their talents and abilities can be developed through effort, good teaching, and persistence. Now, they don't necessarily think everyone's the same or anyone can be a genius, but they believe everyone can get smarter if they work at it. Mindset's a simple idea discovered by world-renowned Stanford University psychologist Carol Dweck. In decades of research on achievement and success, a simple idea that makes all the difference. Teaching a growth mindset creates motivation and productivity. How's that, Sarah, to a start to a podcast?
Those are great reminders of what we're going to be talking about today. So before we jump in to those 5 ways a growth mindset can help leaders navigate what we're experiencing in the world today, let me remind you that you can find show notes for this episode at transformingmission.org/podcast and look for episode 193. If you want to see a full list of the different themes that we've covered throughout 2021, head over to transformingmission.org/podcast 2021. As Christ-centered leaders seeking to lead with courage, here are 5 ways you can embody a growth mindset and model being a learning leader in the midst of all of the challenges that we are experiencing right now. So think again of what Tim reminded us of, and if talents and abilities can be developed in the midst of all of the challenges that life continues to bring our way, here's our best wisdom for you as Christ-centered leaders. So, Tim, what is our first piece of wisdom? Yes, I'm calling us wise.
Thanks for the compliment. The first one would be know your sources. Now, Sarah, what are we talking about when we say know your sources?
Well, let me put it in a bit of a negative context to begin with. In the age of Google and the University of Facebook, everyone can have an opinion, right? So what we want to encourage you to think about, and this is the more positive part, recognize that everyone communicates with a point of view. And so when you understand the point of view and the source of that point of view, you'll understand and communicate with greater clarity. You'll also be more able to explore different perspectives. So how I think about this is when you prep a sermon or a Bible study. So, Tim, what sources do you use?
Well, first I start with a Bible.
Great place to start. Now, it sounds like I'm being silly, but you go to the source. Now, my guess is, Tim, you're not going to the original papyrus that the Bible was written on, but the best English interpretation that we might have, you begin with a text, right? And then what do?
Well, I look for the context, the historical context, maybe even the literary context. I'm looking for what the meaning of the scripture would have been in its original writing.
And then you also look at who authored the book and what do we know or not know about the author of that book. And all of that, you exegete the text. That's what we call that. We call it exegesis. In the same way, we need to exegete the culture and the conversations that we're participating in. So that's what we mean by know your sources and use your sources to be able to navigate what you're experiencing.
So, Sarah, let me ask a question. This will be for my clarity. Would you say that there's a difference between what we get on social media and what we might get on a news broadcast or reading a newspaper or a magazine?
Is there a difference? I think all of those are media sources. And so one is social media, one is considered news media, but they're all media. And so you need to understand that what that media is presenting to you, again, has a point of view. They have a perspective. And most news media and most social media outlets, the people that you're following, the people that you're friends with, they all have a perspective. So I put both of those in the category of media, and I don't think that media, I want to say this carefully and clearly, here's my perspective, I'll own it. I don't think that we are living in a time that media, whether it is our news media or our social media, is reporting facts. I think we're living in a time that media is marketing a perspective. They're trying to garner viewers. They're trying to get the likes. They're trying to get a reaction. And so when we know and understand that, where can we go to get the most, I'm going to use a word close to you, unbiased version of the truth? Or how can you compare the sources of information? So if you tend to listen or watch one news outlet that you know has one perspective, what's another perspective that you could listen to? And we'll get into this more as we walk through the five ideas. Does that answer your question?
It does, because I think maybe what was in my mind was that if you're going to know the source or understand the source, there are lots of, I guess in my thinking, there are lots of places that we tend to think can do the work for us. And we have to be discerning about what information we receive and what the truth of that information might be. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about the source.
Okay, I was being generous.
Well, you were being
I was being generous in saying that what gets communicated is truthful, but you just made a really important distinction that some of what is out there is just false. It's fabricated. And yeah, I won't even go down that road.
But I'll add to what you're saying, and that is, if we're not willing to diversify our thinking in terms of the sources, we tend to only get one side of a story, which may not be true.
Right.
And what we're talking about, and you do the same thing in Scripture. I mean, I've taught preaching courses where I know the person who was standing to preach never read the Scripture, but they preached a sermon.
Yeah, they read all of the commentaries about it. They found another sermon online. Now I'm stepping on toes, and never really got into the text and the meaning behind that text.
So a learning leader is always going to look for text, context, and a big one not only for the Scripture, but a big one for today, I think, is who's doing the writing. And from what perspective is the author coming? I mean, those are all important things, which means a learning leader is working a little bit. It's not going to fall right in your lap.
Yeah, and I think both of us have alluded to this, but I'm going to say it directly. Part of what we're saying by know your sources and use your sources is you need to come to a conclusion for yourself based on the information that you gather. Not simply being lazy and adopting the opinions that somebody else offers. Most of what we are experiencing in the world today, I would say, is way more complex than what a Facebook post or a tweet or a TikTok could ever communicate to the world. So let's move on to number 2, Tim, because I think we might be getting ahead of ourselves in terms of the other wisdom.
I'm sure we're getting ahead of ourselves because the second one is ask questions, and that's what I was doing. Now, the second one is, first one's know your source. The second one is just practice curiosity, ask questions.
Yeah, and I think another way to put that is have a healthy skepticism. In grade school, we all learn to ask the who, what, when, where, why, and how questions. And I would encourage you that if you're trying to have a conversation and trying to learn from other people and really engage in what is going on here, the what questions are going to be the most open-ended and provide the most opportunity for conversation. And I say that because why and how and when and who, all of those questions can bring about defensiveness, and it's often not viewed as curiosity. So if you want to step into the pool, into the shallow end, start with those what questions to create a space for that conversation and truly present yourself as a curious person. And of course, I think tone has a huge amount to do with this. I can say, what were you thinking? And it still sounds very accusatory. But if I say to Tim, well, what were you thinking? That was a question of curiosity, not an accusation. We started this episode by saying all of the challenges that are continuing to emerge around us. And we probably don't need to remind you, but let's just stop for a minute and think about some of the current news media and things that are swirling in the world that are happening. And if you're listening to this at a later time, maybe this will be a time to reflect back on how you have grown and changed in the midst of what we're about to say. So right now, we're hearing about, because of COVID-19, ICU beds in hospitals in certain parts of the country are filling up. There's been an earthquake in Haiti, and we're hearing reports of people sleeping outside at night because they're afraid to go to sleep in their own homes, or their homes have been destroyed. We've had news reports that now in Afghanistan, the Taliban has taken over, and what are the impacts of that on how the country is going to be led, and all of the natural resources, the minerals that are a part of Afghanistan, and how is that impacting the world? Not to mention, what does it mean for women and children in that country and their place? There's parts of our country that are experiencing water shortages. And let me come really close to home for some of you. Kids are going back to school, and there's a whole lot of angst and anxiety around that. And that's just in the past week. So in the midst of all of that, there's a lot of emotions, there's a lot of experiences, and let's go back to number 1, there's a lot of perspective. So as Christ-centered leaders, if we're going to lead with love in any of these situations, we've got to get curious. Now, hear me. I am not saying get curious about every single example that I just offered you, because you will be exhausted, and that is not our intent. What we are saying is, when you find yourself in the midst of those conversations or someone saying something, get curious and ask questions and model for other people what it means to be a learning leader. You are not expected to be an expert on the events in Afghanistan, on water shortages, on what's happening and why another earthquake happened in Haiti, let alone on COVID and ICU beds and. So remember what we said in number 1. Everyone has a perspective. Ask questions and be kind. And kindness when asking questions often looks like being quiet and listening.
Yeah, I think, Sarah, one of the things that I would say to keep in mind when you're asking questions is the larger piece of all this is how we relate to one another, love and care one another. So a growth mindset brings us to a place of being able to listen and receive even opinions or perspectives different than our own without being defensive. And part of what we're talking about is being able to ask the questions that allow for an open dialogue and conversation, and not just, the way I say it, going toe to toe with somebody, because nobody's going to win at that point. And who we are people of the living God, and we model love for one another. And I'm sure that if God really wanted to do it, God could just wipe us out because we're always going toe to toe with God. So I don't think that's what we want to do. I think asking the questions continues to keep an open communication.
Well said.
Ready for number 3?
Sure.
With the information you're receiving, test what you're seeing, hearing, and reading.
So on this one, what I want to say, and Tim, you might have something more intelligent to say about this, is use common sense. But when I want to say that, then I pause and say, common sense seems uncommon. So another way to say it might be test what you're hearing against the question, does that really add up? So after you've used your resources and asked questions and gotten curious, test what you're hearing against your values and the values of the people, organization, church that you lead. Tim just alluded to one of our values as followers of Jesus. It's love. Now, we've given some heavy examples in the first two. On this one, we've got a more lighthearted example, but I think you can extrapolate the example to other areas of life as well. So, Tim, you want to tell our listeners how this all came about? Set the scene.
Well, yeah, you and I have talked on podcasts before that we are Cincinnati Reds fans, and we're often texting each other during a ball game. One of the things that I've liked, especially during this season, are a couple of rookies who play for the Reds. It's Jonathan India and Tyler Stevenson. Now, I'll be biased here and just say that Jonathan India should be Rookie of the Year. But what I hear and watch on television is they talk a lot about Tyler Stevenson doing the same. So I think the other night, as they were talking about Tyler Stevenson being having the leading batting average for National League rookies, didn't you text me something about that?
Yeah, I saw they had it next to his batting average, and I said, hang on, how can that be with the way that Jonathan India is hitting?
And I think I text back and said, Jonathan India is an everyday player, and Tyler Stevenson, although he's playing a lot, is not a regular player. And so I'm betting India has more at-bats.
Right. And so I started digging into the stats. I tested what I saw on the television, and what I found was, yes, Jonathan India had a 282 batting average, and Tyler Stevenson had a 291 batting average. But when you looked at their at-bats, Jonathan India had over 100 more at-bats than Tyler Stevenson. So while Stevenson does have a higher batting average, it's in far fewer at-bats. And I went, okay, now the stat makes sense. And I would say, based on that, so really, Jonathan India is the better player because he has been able to maintain with a daily appearance on the field and in the batter's box a 282 average, whereas Tyler Stevenson might only get one at bat in a game when he comes in and isn't the starting catcher.
So based upon what I'm seeing, hearing, and reading, Jonathan India should be Rookie of the Year.
Right. So that just supported what Tim's point of view was from the beginning, that when I say, yeah, but Tyler Stevenson has a higher batting average. Now, I don't know what their batting averages are now because they've played a couple of games since we saw that. But
And
what
didn't get any hits.
he didn't get any hits. So what begins to happen in situations like this is someone might take this slice of data from this moment in time and continue to say, but Tyler Stevenson has a higher batting average. But Tyler Stevenson has a higher batting average. But Tyler Stevenson has a higher batting average. When the statistics have changed, when we have more information now, because they've played more games and they've had more at bats. So the testing goes back to understanding your sources and asking questions about what you are reading and when it is even happening. We'll see if Tim gets his way and Jonathan India ends up as Rookie of the Year, because he's sure having an amazing year. Anything else you want to offer about that example, Tim, and the wisdom about testing what you're seeing, hearing, and reading?
I'm going to do the testing what you're seeing, hearing, and reading. And that is, we've done some studies of local churches trying to help churches be focused on the mission. And so some churches are a little concerned about the direction of the denomination. Maybe I should change that. They're a lot concerned about the direction of the denomination. But when we dig deeper about their concern, the assumption is that it's around human sexuality. But what I'm learning is that there are some churches that are concerned that they're United Methodist because they once were former UB churches. And they feel like that they've been lost in the kind of leadership that they used to have, and they've never had that kind of leadership as being a United Methodist church. And so in seeing, hearing, and reading, if we put it that way, I learned something. I had to step aside from the assumption that I was making that it wasn't so much about human sexuality. That may play something in it, but it's been a 50-year-long anxiety. And I think it would be good for us to really understand when we're talking with people what's going on, if we can, and test what we can so that we can relate the best way we can. Because a growth mindset keeps us in relationship with people. And that's part of the seeing, hearing, and testing what we're reading.
Yeah, you're reminding me of something I listened to this morning. It was a great visual for me to think about just what you just said, Tim, and it was that of a maze. So picture a maze and picture it in a square box, and there's entry points to that maze on all sides of the box. But the goal is for everybody to get to the center. And that path that is going to get people to the center looks different for a lot of people. There are some people that are going to follow, the same path, and it is about human sexuality. But for other people, it's, they're, how we say it, circling the porcelain bowl over and over and over again about things. And it's something else completely different. And the image of a maze was a helpful image for me to think about the times that we're living in and trying to help people stay focused where we need to stay focused.
Ready for number 4?
Ready for number 4.
Integrate what you're learning into the practice of your leadership.
This is a big one that I think we miss an awful lot. And we miss it because we're busy. And when we're busy, there isn't the margin for us to hit the pause button and stop and ask the question, what was that meaning about? What did that interaction that I had with my child mean? That article that I read, what what does that have to do with what we're doing today in leadership and in the life of the church? And so, one of the best ways to do this is through daily reflection and prayer. And Tim, I know that you do this really well, and you have a practice that I think for as long as I have known you, you have been doing at the end of the day. So, you want to offer that example to our listeners?
Yeah, there's a time at the end of the day. It's not necessarily the same time every day. And in fact, sometimes it even happens early the next day because I'm not going to bed yet. But before I go to bed, I practice a time of reflection. I reflect back on the day as much as I can remember of what I've written down in terms of people with whom I've interacted, situations I've been in, and thinking about how I oftentimes reacted instead of responded, thinking also that what's important are those relationships. So if I've done something or said something or reacted or overreacted, I sometimes make a note to make contact with somebody the next day just to say either I apologize or I come in and say, I was really I reacted and I should have responded. So it's the end of the day. The point is there's a time of reflection about the events of the day, the relationships, the people with whom I've interacted.
Yeah, and so if you've been listening to us for a while, you've heard us talk before about how Tim processes either by talking or, as he just indicated here, simply reflecting. I tend to process things by writing them down. And so whether you are a verbal processor or a person who writes things down, the point is to integrate what you're learning into your practice of leadership. Watch for something that I'm going to be posting about one unexpected tool for leadership, because it's going to point to how journaling can help you as a leader. There has been, it's amazing to me that someone has spent as much time as they have spent proving and exploring how journaling can help leaders. And not only can it help leaders, but it helps leaders in the specific way that we're talking about today in terms of developing a growth mindset, because it helps you improve focus, it helps enhance confidence, and it also helps build resilience. So it might be, and this doesn't have to be, again, anything formal, at the end of the day that you pause and simply write down, what are the moments that I'm grateful for? What are the moments that I need to go back and make amends? What are the moments that I learned something? I'm just tossing these out into the universe. Whatever you need in that moment to integrate what you have been learning in the day and what you experienced in that day into your practice of leadership. And that's part of why we started at the end of each one of these episodes to have that section on write it down and talk it out, so that you are integrating and we're helping you to integrate what you're learning into the practice of leadership. It's not just a couple of questions for, because we wanted to come up with questions.
Whether you're writing it down or whether you are verbalizing it, the point is the reflection. That's where the growth is. That's where the growth mindset takes place. And keeping in mind, again, that it's relationships that are important. Anytime that you have the reflection upon the interaction with others allows you to be more present in the moment during the day. For me, at least, and that's something that I've had to work on for a long time, is that I can check out pretty quickly. But as I've started reflecting back on things, I can say, why did I do that? This is what I need to work on. And it allows me to become more, as people hear and read what I say, it helps you become more who you were created to be. So that's what's important to me.
You want to take us to number 5?
Sure. It's the last one. I don't like the last ones because that means the podcast is coming close to an end. Number 5, practice generosity with yourself and others.
Yeah, so this one I think is simple in terms of understanding it. It's challenging in terms of practice. Um, be generous with yourself and others. So when we think about a growth mindset, we're talking about capacity building. And so when you're fed up or fired up, that's the moment to hit the pause button and ask yourself, what's the most generous interpretation I can offer in this moment? I've said this over and over again, that asking that question alone often will help me to reorient my emotions to the present moment and what is needed.
Sarah, you do that better than anyone that I know.
I'm thinking of a moment last week that I did not do this. I did not do this initially, and then I caught myself and just paused and went, okay, this is not worth getting worked up about. But I I think why I do it now is because I've seen how effective it is. That when we are generous with people and when we give people the benefit of the doubt, little asterisks here if this was a written document and not a verbal format that we were communicating in. I'm not saying be a pushover. That's another podcast for another day. Because some people practice generosity, practice generosity, practice generosity, practice generosity. And instead of getting to the root of what's happening, they end up getting steamrolled in situations. Not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is you're in the midst of, oh, let's take a silly example from this morning. Went to do my Kroger pickup of groceries. And I ended up with 2 cartons of eggs. And I thought, once again, Kroger has given me more groceries than I purchased. That's my generous interpretation. And then I went, no, wait a second. Maybe I accidentally ordered 2 cartons of eggs. And guess what? I accidentally ordered 2 cartons of eggs. So, I mean, it can be in silly moments like that, but what I have seen happen in that moment, instead of play that situation out, you charged me twice for something that I only wanted one of. Like, someone could get really frustrated at that situation, and instead, oh, maybe you gave me another gift this week. Oops, nope. I paid for it and I ordered it. It was all on me. So practice generosity. I think the other thing for me on this one is not only have I seen it work, but I see how much happier and kinder the environments and cultures that I'm a part of end up being when we start from a place of generosity versus starting from a place of scarcity or of judgment or
From a place that we're going to pick a fight.
yeah. Yeah.
In the times in which we live, the culture, practicing generosity goes a long way in terms of just listening to people who feel, I think we've got a lot of people who feel disenfranchised, that they feel disconnected. And when they feel disconnected and don't feel like they have control, there's a fighting spirit in people.
Yeah.
And we're the folks who model this love of God in relationship. And so it's not a matter of letting things go if something should be addressed, but it is a matter of understanding where people are and trying to start from where they're coming. At any period of time, any of us, if I may say it this way, and please forgive me, at any given time, any of us can be pretty stupid.
Right.
Those are the times we need grace.
Yeah.
And if I'm going to do unto others as I have them do unto me, I will extend a little grace in those moments because I know that people have extended grace to me.
Yeah. And Tim, you're reminding me of one other thing that I wanted to say about this one. We often don't know what else is happening in people's lives. We don't know if they're taking care of a child or an aging parent. We don't know if their spouse just came home and told them that they lost their job. We don't know if their basement has flooded. We don't know if now all of a sudden the place that they have been living, they can no longer. I mean, there's a million things that can be going on in people's lives that we don't know. We don't know if they just got off of a phone call with someone who told them that their dearest friend in life has cancer. I mean, you just don't know. And so practicing generosity and getting curious and asking questions, I think together the 5 things that we've talked about in terms of knowing your sources, asking questions, testing what you're seeing, hearing, and reading, integrate what you're learning, and practicing generosity. If you want to create a whole different culture that truly is based in the love of God, these are basic things that every one of us can do to contribute to a culture that is generous and kind and loving and filled with grace. And yes, I just said the same thing in 3 different ways because we hear those words in different ways. Before I start preaching, I think there was a bonus that you wanted to add in here.
Yeah, we talked about several bonuses, but we'll try this one. And we've talked a little bit about this already. Don't try to address these tough topics and challenging situations in a conversation on social media, on Facebook, Twitter. This is not where this is supposed to take place.
Yeah, and maybe the positive way to say that, Tim, is to make relationships primary. That if we're focused on relationships, when there is something that is challenging and important, we pick up the phone, we say, hey, can you jump on Zoom? Hey, can you meet me for coffee? You have the conversations in real life with people, not behind the platform of social media. So any final thoughts on anything we've talked about today, Tim?
Well, there are lots of thoughts. I don't know how final they are. But there's a part of systems thinking that's called protective capacity. And it's where a system doesn't, I guess it may be in planning or strategizing, doesn't use all of its time where it can't be open to new ideas or something that's happening on the moment and respond in a different way. And I'm just thinking that, and somebody may have written a book on this, I don't know, but I'm just thinking that a growth mindset really has the capacity to receive new things or different things, has the capacity of being able to make decisions that maybe have not been made before, but in the moment need to be made. A growth mindset is keeping in mind the main thing, and that main thing is those relationships of care and compassion, of love and forgiveness even. And I think the thing that we don't say that I think needs to be said. So now here's the great wisdom that you said that I had. We sometimes think we do these things because we're going to get a good outcome or a good result. I think the reason we do them, it's because who we are. And it's not done because we're going to get a positive feedback or positive response. It's because that's who we are. And that's one of the things that you and I talk about, is that who we are is how we lead. And so if we're leading out of who we are, we find a way to know the source, to ask the questions, to do the research we need to do the research on, and really practice generosity, because isn't that what God's done with us? That's who we are. So I don't know how final that is, but that's the best I have for this time.
Thank you. So here are your 2 questions for write it down or talk it out this week. And once again, this is your opportunity to practice integration. First question is a two-parter. Which one of the 5 reminders we offered do you do regularly? And then conversely, which one of the 5 reminders will you start integrating into your daily life? And then question number 2, what informs your point of view? And why is that the case? As a reminder, you can find show notes for this episode, including those 2 questions and the 5 pieces of wisdom that we offered here today at transformingmission.org/193. And remember, who you are is how you lead. Bye for now.